The name of the God of Jacob should support you. He should send you help from the Kodesh. The Kodesh is the holy room in the Beis Hamikdash. It's called the Kodesh. What was in the Kodesh? The menorah, the golden menorah that was lit every day. The golden table that had 12 loaves on it from Shabbos to Shabbos. The new loaves, they would push them in as they pushed the old ones out. And then the Kohanim who had done their week would get to eat. Like when we eat matzahs on Pesach. They were matzah, the loaves were matzah. They were big, thick. They were this thick. Handbreadth thick. They were about this long. And they rose up on the two sides like kind of a barge. And then there was a small altar that was just about this big, but just about this big square, covered in gold. And that was only used for burning incense. They would put coals on it that they took from the big altar outside, and then the Kohen would come in and drop this very, very finely ground powder, which was the incense, and the whole place would fill up with smoke. Yizkar kol minchaisecha, Hashem should recall all your offerings, your flower offerings, your animal offerings, whether they were birds or sheep, lambs, goats, or expensive offerings of oxen. Yudashna Sela, they should be graciously accepted. And Hashem should then in turn grant your heart's requests. And enable you to fulfill all your good resolutions. Obviously, you're promising you're going to be better. Hashem should help you. You should live up to it. Let us rejoice, Hashem, in your salvation. V'shem Eloheinu Nidgel, and we'll raise the name of our God on high. Hashem should fulfill all your requests. Ata Yodaiti, says King David, now I know. Ki Heshia Adonai Mashiach, Hashem saves his anointed one. How could he say that? Because he'd been saved himself many times from impossible situations. Yahanehu Mishmei Kodshe, he should answer him, Hashem should answer him from his holy chamber. Vigores, with might, Yesha, of salvation, Yamine, from his right hand. That is to say, the might is from the left hand, but it's coming from the right hand at the same time. It's mixed. From the right, which is the side of kindness. So it's strength with kindness. Tough love. Some come with tanks and chariots, and others with cavalry and infantry. B'Shem Adonai Eloheinu Nazkir, we come with the name of God on our lips. Hema karu v'nafalu, they bent over and they fell. 9. They bend and fall. Okay, that's what it says there in the English. They bend and fall. V'anachnu kamnu, but we rose up. We rise up. V'niseidad, and we stand strong, stalwart. Adonai Yishia Melech Anenu v'yem karenu. Hashem should answer us on the day that we call. He is our King. Chapter 4 of Tanya. So we have 613 commandments, 3 intellects, 7 emotional drivers called midas. And with these, we have to do all the commandments. These are the faculties with which we fulfill the 613 commandments, 3 intellects and 7 drivers that are in the heart. And like we said yesterday, this amazing idea that Hashem has no image. We make no image of Hashem. Hashem has no image. An image is a limitation. But we do have, in a spiritual sense, the image of God is the 613 commandments. That's a composite image of holiness, Hashem's holiness. So as much as we can incorporate of these commandments in our being with our 10 faculties, so we merge our 10 faculties with Hashem's 10 faculties. And I'll tell you, I once saw a painting by a Dutch painter from maybe 600 years ago. But it teaches a lesson. It taught me a very important lesson. The painting, in the lower part of the painting was a person lying on a bed. He was dying, he was dead, he was gone. And there were sort of kind of diaphanous creatures, little people, I guess you'd call them angels, had taken him and were carrying him up. So that his body was still lying there, but he was being carried up. That is to say, a finer level, more a spiritual level. You'd say his soul was being carried up. And then that image of the two angels and the soul was repeated on a higher level, only more transparent. And then that was repeated on a higher level, and that was even more transparent. And they were going up and up and up and up and up and up and up. To the top of the painting was a vortex, if that's the right word for it, of light. And they were proceeding towards that light. And eventually they were disappearing in the light, and you couldn't tell the difference between them and the light. And it's a very powerful image, a very beautiful image, that everything here in the physical world has a spiritual counterpart, and there are levels and levels and levels, like we learned that there are 4 worlds. So that what we do down here physically is being repeated at the same time on a higher spiritual level, in a higher world, and via the way our soul is in that higher level world. And where does that get its energy from? From an even higher world. And so what we're doing down here is repeated on one level higher. And then that's repeated again on yet another level higher. And another, until it actually blends with its source, which the source of what we're doing is in the Torah itself. It's the commandment that we're doing. Isn't that amazing? So that you're never alone. In fact, there's a whole hierarchy of beings, spiritual beings, emanating from you, connecting with you, giving you life and energy, and you're likewise giving them life and energy. What's the big difference? Why does it have to be like this? Because if Hashem were just to give us the commandments and they would just be done on the higher levels, it wouldn't change the world. Therefore, your neshama has to come down into this physical world to make the physical world into a place that's a godly place. What's a godly place? A place where the 613 commandments are living, where they're alive, where they are impacting in the physical world. And the way your soul is in a higher world of Yetzirah, or a higher world of Bria, or a higher world of Atzilus, does not impact in a physical way. It doesn't make a physical change. Doesn't make a dwelling place for God. But that is why do we want to make a dwelling place for God? Because that's one of the commandments. Hashem says to us, in a couple of months we're going to read it. Once the Jews get out of Egypt and they get the Torah, so then they build a sanctuary. And Hashem says, build me a sanctuary so that I may dwell amongst them. That's the commandment, to make a holy temple for God where he can be together with us and we can be together with him. And that's in the physical world. So to do that, we have to leave Gan Eden, we have to leave our spiritual abode and come down into this physical world to transform it into a place for God. And all that is symbolized in this week's parsha in many ways. One way is that Yaakov leaves the Holy Land where he was born to his father, Yitzchak. Yitzchak is compared to a holy offering to God because he was offered up as a sacrifice to God. The famous story we read on Rosh Hashanah called the Akedah, the binding of Yitzchak, where Abraham was told to take him up as an offering, and he went all the way. He had the slaughtering knife poised over his neck. And an angel grabbed his hand, that didn't physically grab his hand, but cried out and said, stop. Says, that's not what Hashem wants you to do. He says, well, you told me to bring him up as an offering. I says, so you brought him up, now take him down. It's very important for you to do that. So Yaakov has to leave. Yitzchak is a holy offering. Yaakov has to leave this environment of holiness in the Holy Land. Yitzchak was never allowed to leave the Holy Land. Yaakov is told by both his parents, go quickly before your brother kills you. Go to my family in Haran. Haran, the word Haran means place of anger. Anger in the world. Haran Apoilam. Where is it today? Syria. Somewhere around between Syria and Iraq. That's where our families come from. That's our ancestry. And go there, a place of deceit and corruption, and there you have to be a good Jew. There you have to serve God, and there, Davka, there, Yaakov transforms his life in anything he comes in contact with into holiness, and there he has 12 sons, which become the 12 tribes of Israel. Every one of them is a holy, righteous person. Unlike Abraham, who had 2 sons, only Yitzchak was righteous. Ishmael, we suffer from Ishmael to the present day. We suffer terribly from Ishmael. Murderer. Call him every bad name in the book. And Yitzchak had 2 sons, Yaakov and Esav. Esav was also a murderer, an idol worshiper. Ishmael was not an idol worshiper, but he was everything else. The Ishmaelites of today. They call themselves Hamas. Hamas means murder, anger, and murder. And in this challenging environment of deceitfulness, Yaakov marries into his own family Uncle Lavan. Uncle Lavan is a big con man, a swindler of the first order. And we read all about the deals that they made. There's a very amusing story about the Arizal. We know who the Arizal is. Remember who's the Arizal? Rabbi Yitzchak Luria. He is the one who teaches us all the Kabbalah from the ancient days and comes through him to us, to the Baal Shem Tov, to the Maggid, to the Alter Rebbe, to us. And the Arizal lived for 2 years, a year and a half, 18 months altogether in Sfas. That was it. Didn't live long. But in those 18 months, he accomplished more than most people accomplish in many lifetimes. And the community there was an extraordinary community in Sfas of people who, many of them had fled from Spain during the Inquisition. That was in 1492? This is 500 years ago. more than 500 years ago. And one of the people there was Rabbi Moshe Alshich. Alshich is his name. His commentary is in the Talmud. And he was in the shul there, he was appointed by the Arizal to be the darshan. He's gonna give the Dvar Torah every week. He wanted to learn Kabbalah with the Arizal. The Arizal said, your soul is not fit for this. You have yours. Remember, we learned yesterday: Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod, Pardes. 4 levels of the Torah. Pshat, simple meaning, what happened in the physical world. Drush, what's the ethical lesson that we learned from this? Remez, what's the allegorical implications of what we're learning? And so is Kabbalah. Okay, so he says, you have a soul from the world of drush, like medrash, lessons, ethical lessons. It's called in English homiletics. I never knew what homiletics was. I still don't know. I think it means ethical lessons. So this week's parsha, he gave a lecture. Yerizal was one of the audience, one of the congregation. And he was explaining, you see, Lavan in this week's parsha makes a deal with Yaakov. Lavan says to Yaakov, listen, you're here, you came with nothing. I'm your uncle, so I really have to support you. I'll support you for 30 days. And then we'll see what we can do. So Yaakov says, okay, I'll work for you. Laban was very happy, worked for me for free. It's a good deal. And so Yaakov says, I'll work for you for 7 years. And he says, well, what do you want me to pay you? He said, you don't have to pay me anything. Just let me marry your daughter. That will be my reward, to marry your daughter, Rachel. So Laban says, okay, that's a great deal. I get 7 years work for all I have to do is make a wedding at the end. But he had no intention of making a wedding. He doesn't say so. You never guess it. And Yaakov suspected. At the end of 7 years, he says, okay, now I want to get married. I did my part. And the wedding night is taking place. And what happens? Rachel was a twin, but she was the younger one. And instead of bringing Rachel to the chuppah, Laban brought Leah to the chuppah. And she was wearing a veil. You ever go to a wedding and the people go, you know why they're doing that?
Why?
Because the people there were trying to tell Yaakov, it's Leah, 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 Leah.
Wow, really?
And Yaakov marries her. And in the morning he says, I mean, there were no lights. Didn't have. And the Aram Naharaim Hilton, they didn't have lights. In the morning, he sees it's Leah. He says, what did you do? She says, what did you do? How did you do? Why did you trick me like this? So even though when they made the contract, he said, I want to marry you, Rachel, your daughter, your younger daughter, with all these details, he still tricked them. So I want to marry Rachel, not Rachel from some other family. Your daughter, not your daughter from one of your concubines. If you have a concubine with a daughter named Rachel, your younger daughter. Still, he brought Leah. He gave him Leah, and he said, what did you do? And really, Yaakov could have said, this is not a marriage. You tricked me. I'm not married. I'm not married. But he didn't do that. You know why? You never guess why. But the Rebbe explains that because in those days, after the flood, the whole world took upon themselves the importance of telling the truth, keeping your word. It was like an unwritten commandment to keep your word. And since he gave his word that he would be her husband, and the Torah just says he didn't want to embarrass her. We understand from Rashi, it would have been a tremendous humiliation if he would start screaming, "You tricked me, you fooled me, you gave me your other daughter." And Lavan said, "Why do you do this?" He says, "Because we don't marry off the younger sister before the older sister. We don't do that. Here, we don't do that here." But he never said that. Yaakov was suspicious. How did I get there? Why am I telling this whole story? So anyway, so Laban answers him and says, "It's okay. Just keep Sheva brachas." Oh yeah, and I know why. Stay. Let's just have Sheva brachas. After Sheva brachas, you can marry Rachel. And work for him for another 7 years. So he got 14 years for nothing. Not for nothing. He made a big wedding party. Should we be ashamed of this? This is our great grandfather. We have to be very careful to be honest, because we have these genes in us too. This is where we come from. And we see it. Rivka tricks Yitzchak into giving Yaakov the blessings. She disguises him with hairy skins on his arms and his neck. Anyway, so they make this deal that he's going to, and we're going to read in this week's Parsha what kind of a deal it was. So Yaakov says, he says, how are we going to, yeah, after he works for 14 years and Rachel is his wife and Yosef is born, he says, now I need to make some money. We need to make a new contract. So Laban says, okay, what are your terms? He says, you know what? I'll take all the sheep that have brown spots and all the goats that have rings, white rings around their ankles, various identifying marks. Those will be for me. Any sheep that are born, any goats that are born with these identifying marks, they will be for me. But to make it fair, let's take any of the sheep or goats that have these marks. Now, you take them. So I'm left with no animals that have these identifying marks. Then from now on, any animals that are born with these identifying marks will be my reward. They'll be my salary. And Yaakov was a master breeder. He worked very, very hard. And the Torah tells us what he did. He took sticks that if you whittled off the peel, you could make designs, because underneath the brown peel was white. And when the sheep and the lambs and the goats would go to drink, he would put these sticks in the water. They would see, and they would have babies that reflected the markings on the sticks. And this way, he developed over 6 years, a huge amount of goats and sheep and everything. And he became very wealthy. He became fabulously rich farmer, Yaakov. So the Alshich, Moshe Alshich, so then what happened? When Laban saw that this was happening, he renegotiated. He changed the terms. It says in the Torah, he changed the terms 10 times. The oral Torah, now we know what the oral Torah is, right? That's the explanations behind what's written in the text, in the Torah. The oral Torah says, it says 10 times, it was 10 times, 10 times. 100 times. So in this particular drasha that the Alshich made, he explained to the congregants there every one of Lavan's tricks, 100 tricks, he explained. And the Arizal was sitting there smiling. He was enjoying this immensely. And afterwards, he burst out laughing. People came and said, why were you smiling? Why did you laugh? He says, because, now you understand why I'm telling you the whole story, because it's related to what I started telling you in the first place. Something's hard to keep track, when you go down a certain path and then you forget where you started. You need to have a string to find your way back. Like in the labyrinth. Anyway, because Lavan was being spoken about in Shul, his soul descended and came to listen to the drasha. And every time that Reb Moshe Alshich described one of Lavan's tricks, he was ashamed and he nodded and he had to say it's true. "99 times. And the 100th time, so the soul of Lavan burst out and said, nobody could hear it, but the Alshich could hear it, and the Arizal could hear it. And he cried, he exclaimed, it's not true, and he ran away. That I didn't do, which really he did. Just he was ashamed that 100 times the Alshich had caught him out, knew what he had done. Such a swindler. So why did I tell you this whole story? Because from this week's Parsha, but it shows that everything that you do has a connection with higher levels as well. And Lavan really came from a very, very high source, because the word Lavan means white. It comes from a very, very high source in holiness called the whiteness, like the whiteness in the brain, the source of semen, the seminal white drop. But it fell very low because it's very, very greedy. And you see this in this story, that the soul of Lavan had to come and bear the humiliation eternally of all the selfish things that he had done. That's this week's Parsha. Okay. Now we have to learn some Tanya. So if a person will meditate on the greatness of Hashem, this is what we were learning, then this will cause him to develop a feeling of awe before the majesty of God and a desire to cling to God. How can we cling to God? How? By connecting our 10 faculties with his 10 faculties. So that with our intellect, we learn and we teach and we internalize the ideas of the Torah, which are God's wisdom and his understanding. And we do the things that the Torah asks us with our physical body. So that's the way that we physically embrace Hashem. And we do it, in particular, we do it with physical objects. With a cup of coffee, with a lulav, with an esrog, with matzah, with wine for Kiddush and Havdalah, with challahs and gefilte fish, with tefillin out of leather, with tzitzis out of wool from sheep, with mezuzahs on the doorposts of our homes, physical things. All the mitzvahs, 613 mitzvahs, they're all physical. Even mitzvahs of love and fear, it's a physical love, a physical fear. It can be measured. Psychologists, the lie detector. How does the lie detector work? It measures changes in your physical body. that indicate that you're not telling the truth. So by connecting our physical being, the 248 positive commandments, the 365 negative commandments, things that we don't do because Hashem doesn't want us to do them, we embrace Hashem. We embody Hashem in the physical world. And people see us and say, oh, now I understand why they're different. Because they're doing godly things. If God was a physical being, that's what he would do too. You go to the bank and the person ahead of you leaves a $100 bill on the counter for the teller and walks away. He's oblivious. He says, excuse me, did you leave this here? Just did a big mitzvah. And everybody sees, oh, somebody else might have just put it in his pocket. You returned it. It's returning lost object. It's one of the mitzvahs of the Torah. And it says here, one cannot truly cleave to God. We have a mitzvah. We learned this in chapter 2. We have a mitzvah to cleave to Hashem. How can we cleave to Hashem? Hashem is not physical. And the sages tell us by cleaving to a person who does all the commandments, which is a tzaddik, it will be considered as if you were cleaving to God. Because you're doing the things that God tells you to do. You're doing the things that God would do. It even says that God commands us with his mitzvahs. What do you mean his mitzvahs? Why are they his mitzvahs? Because he commanded us? Not just that. They're his mitzvahs because he also does them. In a spiritual way, but he also does them. It says when Yaakov was whittling the sticks, it was like he was accomplishing what we do when we put on tefillin. When we tie the straps with the unity of God written in the boxes on our arm and put it over our brain, that's how we keep the mitzvah of tefillin, and that's what Yaakov did before he had the commandment of tefillin. That's what he did to fulfill that idea. And then he tells us, I'm going to conclude with this thought here at the bottom of page 79, an extraordinary thought. This is from the Kabbalah, from the Zohar. Who wrote the Zohar?
Rabbi
Bar Yochai. That the 248 positive mitzvahs are called the limbs of the king. The limbs. So when we do 248 mitzvahs with our physical limbs, we connect our physical being with Hashem's 248 spiritual limbs, which are the commandments. I told you yesterday, when I learned this chapter, I got so excited. They're fantastic. I felt like I was home. I felt like I'd come home at last. This is where I could anchor my ship. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. The ship came into harbor. Okay, it's a beautiful day out. Enjoy it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.